Ladies and gentlemen, the next panel session has a deep fascination for me, the lying art, otherwise put, where fact and fiction collide in historical fiction. I have my own strong views on this and shall endeavour to keep quiet about them. There are also some strong and I think differing views amongst our panellists, so it's with pleasure that I hand the panel over to Ian Mortimer, who is peculiarly well placed to preside. He is an historian and author of a number of best-selling historical books, perhaps best known for The Time Traveller's Guide to Medieval England. He's also an historical novelist writing Elizabethan conspiracy stories. Ladies and gentlemen, The Lying Art.
Thank you, Richard. Can everybody hear me? I hope you can. I've been told that the microphones aren't working that well, but let's kick off anyway. I think the best thing to do is if everybody introduces themselves rather than me introduce everybody, because I haven't got the notes here. I was very organised up to the point at which I left the house, then I left everything behind. So I have scribbled down the questions which I had sent to the panelists, and they are the same questions you were circulated, so don't panic about that. But Daisy, do you want to kick off by introducing yourself?
Okay, I'll just have to lean over here. Shall I actually sit on your lap? Would that help?
That'd be very nice.
Later.
My name's Daisy Goodwin. I've written 2 books, Silver River, which was a memoir where I made a lot of it up, and my second book is a novel called My Last Duchess Here and the American Heiress in the States, where it was all based on fact, so what can I say?
You're next.
Oh, me. Hi, I'm Harry Sidebottom. As my day job, I teach Greek and Roman history at Oxford, and I also write novels. I've written 5 historical novels in a series called The Warrior of Rome.
My name's Emma Darwin. My first novel was The Mathematics of Love, and it had one foot in 1819 and one foot in 1976, so I'd already bucked the trend of the idea that you have to take a period and stick to it or you won't sell. And my second novel, A Secret Alchemy, in order for it not only to be published but also get me a PhD, I had to spend 30,000 words talking about historical fiction and what I did and what other people did.
Yeah. You've already heard about me.
My name is Barbara Ewing, and I used to be an actress until I got too old and was only playing the wife or the mother. So I started writing, and not all of my novels are historical, but I'm on my 9th, and I think the last 5 are historical novels, and my particular period is from the very end of the 18th century up into the 19th century. I like that bit that hasn't been written about so much, which is sort of very early Victorian.
I'm Elizabeth Chadwick. I was first published in 1990 with a novel called The Wild Hunt. I set out wanting to write medieval adventure fiction, similar to the sort of thing you see in TV and on films, like The Vikings or The Black Shield of Falworth. And I've gradually moved along a career progression line to working on biographical fiction, with novels about the great William Marshall, the greatest knight, and his family to defy a king. And also, I've just handed in my first novel in a trilogy about Eleanor of Aquitaine, the Summer Queen.
Thank you. The way we're going to play this is a bit like question time. I've written some questions which the panel are going to each have a stab at answering. The theme really comes from an article in The Guardian a few years ago, which I was responsible for, which basically said that people use, it's inaccurate, as a way of criticising historical fiction. And really we shouldn't get too hung up about accuracy, because the real question is it any good? And I got a lot of feedback from this, including somebody who wrote to the Richard III Society saying, how on earth can a historian say that anybody should lie about the past? So it's carried on being a theme, and I'm going to start off by asking the panel here what I think is the real nub of the debate, which is lying or consciously sort of putting in untruths ever justifiable in historical fiction? And if so, in what contexts? And I've told Harry he's got first dibs on this one, so there we go.
Well, I think the simple answer is yes, it's fine if you do it for good reasons. And the good reasons can either be for historical reasons, to play with a surface level of truth to reveal a deeper one, or if you do it for narrative reasons. I actually, despite being a historian and a historical novelist, I really don't get too hung up on the lying bit. I do always have an afterword when I explain how I've been lying, how I've played with history. But I think the reason I don't get too hung up is what I do as a day job. I spend a lot of time reading, thinking about, writing about the classical historians from Heralds onwards, and they did it all the time. And I think this, this division between history and historical fiction is essentially a 19th century invention. And it's the borders are becoming blurred as more and more historians turn towards novelistic forms, thinking of things like Simon Sharma's book, Dead Certainties, or my personal favourite, a man called Jonathan Spence, who's an Ivy League professor of Chinese history, and he wrote a novel, sorry, he didn't write a novel, he wrote a history book, but in the form of a novel. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with lying, at least in my books. Obviously, I never lie in my personal life ever.
Thank you. Emma, do you want to go next?
Yes, I agree. I think the thing that we all have to remember is that it's called a historical novel. It's a novel. You know, we made it up. You know, get over it. Having said that, of course, if you do read a historical novel and the stuff that really jars, I mean, if it's just minor slips, it sort of makes what John Gardner in The Art of Fiction calls the fictional dream, it sort of shivers it, but then it really starts to dissolve if you know it's really properly wrong. I mean, your example about there was not a priest within a 3 days ride, and in fact, anywhere in England, there would have been between 5,000 and 8,000 priests within 3 days' ride. You know, if your plot turns on that fact that you can't get extreme unction to the person who's dying or whatever, then frankly, yeah, I'm not going to read any further because the plot has fallen apart because you've got the history wrong. But no, you know, it's a lie to make up a village. Is it better to lie by saying there's a village called Puddleton between Oxford and Banbury? Or is it better to take a village that existed and then change some things so it works to make your story? Because making your story work has to be what we're doing.
But I think it depends on, I mean, I agree with you totally, but I recently had the misfortune to watch a film called Anonymous. I don't know if anybody has seen that, where it turns out that Queen Elizabeth had not one but 2 illegitimate pregnancies, and one by Shakespeare, which was Oxford, and then anyway, it's all very complicated. But I think that I think there's lies, and then there's clonking great whoppers, and I would hate anybody to watch that film and think that could actually have been the case.
Yes.
You know.
Mind you, I mean, one of the very early consciously historical novels of all, which is called The Recess, is 18th century, and it takes the premise that some children were born to Elizabeth. So it's not even an original idea.
I think it's justifiable within certain circumstances. If you want to play with an idea, I can't think of one offhand, but sorry, my mind's gone blank.
Shall we come back to you?
Yes, I think come back to me.
Right.
Yeah, come back to me.
Because this is such a contentious subject, first of all, I looked up the meaning of lie in Chambers, and it said a false statement made with the intent of deceiving. And I'm not sure about that. However, I then looked up invention, which is, I think, what we do, and that says to frame by imagination. And that, I think, is the big difference between absolute lies because it suits your plot and the kind of imagination that all of us as writers should or hopefully have. And I think, this is really what I think, the key is research. If you research your subject, around your subject, bits that have not got very much to do with your subject, but research, and your instinct, I think, starts working. Your instinct says, hang on. And there's something about, and I don't know whether mine is honed in a particular way because of being an actress, I don't know, but I feel does anyone agree with me? You get a feeling and you think, something is happening here, and you can sort of almost smell it. And you can, a bit like what Philippa Gregory was talking about this morning, you research, and there's that, and you think they've missed that. And that's what I think. And so, not an outright lie, but the use of the imagination and instinct and research for invention.
Yes, that's spot on, yes. I agree with that.
You want to come back on that?
It wasn't a lot I was really going to say. It was just that, it's perhaps you might want to play with a concept. What if, and I suppose that goes into alternative history. What if Anne Boleyn hadn't had her head chopped off or something? Or what if Henry VIII was a really nice guy? Let's write history and see what happens then. So you're just playing with the imagination there. But that's specific. I think you have to have historical integrity if you're writing a mainstream historical novel, and make characters as they are.
Can I just say one more thing?
No, please do.
Which is that if anyone here is thinking of writing a historical novel, there is another way, and that is, don't take a famous person or a member of royalty from way back. Take your own person and bring all those people on as minor characters. I mean,
I quite agree. I mean, if you can look at it from the sense that the past is a much more interesting place than just to look at what really did happen.
Yes.
And that's what I do in my novels. I think that's great points all round. But it leads on to the question of accuracy beyond just the invention. And the other question I'm burning to ask everybody is which is more achievable? Historical accuracy or historical authenticity? Because you hear a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't be accurate about the past because we don't know if it was sunny when George III did this or the other. But I create a world that's authentic to that period. Now, as somebody who's played around with social history, I think authenticity is quite difficult as well, but I'd like to know what everybody else thinks about the achievability of accuracy and authenticity. But, Emma, do you want to go first?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge that we see the past through our own eyes. I mean, Hilary Mantel's French Revolution is not Dickens's. Now, Dickens to us seems less authentic in some ways. It seems extremely Dickens and not very French Revolution. But he was nearer. He ought to have been more authentic. To us, it doesn't seem so because, to a degree, we share Mantel's mindset more. And so I think you have to acknowledge that, our sense of authenticity is contingent on where we are. So to a degree, it's going to be smoke and mirrors. One of the ways you spot forgers is once their work moves into the past, what they didn't see they were showing shows much. A 19th century forger's pseudo-Rembrandt looks unbelievably Victorian to us. And I think so having acknowledged that, all you can say is, well, I have to write for my own, I have to write out of my sense of the past and what I get from what I've researched for the people around me, and hope that it works. But particularly with historical voice, which is one of my obsessions, because I write a mean pastiche paston letter. It's really good, though I said it shouldn't, and nobody would read beyond about page 1.5. So to that point of view, you have to give up on authenticity about language. The further back you go, particularly, any time up to the beginning of the novel, then you can at least partly draw on the contemporary fiction of the time. But beyond that, we've got no speech, no conversational speech to go on. You have to... I don't know, what I'd actually want to do, if I may, it's very short, honest, but is to read something that Rose Tremaine wrote in an essay, and anyone who wants, grab me afterwards if you want the reference. All the research done for a novel, all the studying and reading, all the social field work, all the location visiting, all the garnering of what it is or what has been, must be reimagined before it can find a place in the text. It must rise into the orbit of the anarchic, gift-conjuring, unknowing part of the novelist's mind before it can acquire its own truth for the work in question. Reimagining implies some measure of forgetting. And to me, that is absolutely crucial. I never write worse than when I've got the textbook in the other hand. And I think the authenticity actually comes as much from the integrity of me using my own imagination, however it's built, as it comes from me ticking all the boxes of having got it absolutely right. Right, in quotation marks.
It reminds me of a line T.S. Eliot came up with about Ezra Pound. It's inspired by life, and I think that we could learn a lot from that. But, who wants to go next? Daisy?
Well, one of the authenticity issues for me always is, we live, I dare say, do I dare say this? We live in an irreligious age, but if you write about people, 100, 200, 300 years ago, God was very much part of their life. They would have grown up, there'd be no question that they had faith. And I find that when I was writing my book, which is set in the 1890s, it wasn't a big issue in the plot, but it was something that kind of really sort of it troubled me, because I couldn't quite see how to do that, because I think that's one of the hardest things. If you haven't got faith, you can imagine it, but it's very hard to imagine a society where it is central to people's lives in that way. So I think that was something where I had to it was something I felt I had to do, and I think the book would have suffered without it, in a sense. And I think it's those kind of things where you have to. But I think it's like watching Poldark. Do you remember the TV series of Poldark? Well, you know exactly when that was made, because they've all got 70s Farrah Fawcett flicks, with their bodices. So, in a sense, it's ludicrous to think that we're being authentic. How can we possibly be authentic? We're writing novels, with our contemporary imagination about, some random. It's sort of like it's no more accurate than science fiction in a way, and probably less accurate.
And I agree that the mindset, we take our own mindsets for granted. We fuss madly about the costumes in Downton Abbey. I find it completely unwatchable because I can't bear the dialogue. Costumes are gorgeous. And I think that we overestimate how much the physical material stuff matters to get exactly right, and we underestimate how much it matters to get the mindset right. The worldview, the religion that's just in the vein so much that most of the fiction of the time doesn't even mention it, because they don't even have to wonder about whether anyone's thinking that or not. And that's the challenge for us.
Exactly.
I'm terrified of the clothing, because every time I get to the clothing chapters of Time Traveller's Guide, I know there are thousands of reenactors out there who know exactly where the buttons went on. So I just hate writing those chapters.
Especially actors.
Yes.
Well, I think...
Harry, you go.
I think that, for me, they're both incredibly difficult to do, and you're always going to make mistakes. I mean, my colleagues very kindly write to me from all over the world pointing out the mistakes in my novels, which is absolutely lovely of them. And usually in foreign languages, just to make it harder for me to follow. I think...
In Greek.
In Greek. Usually in French, unfortunately, German. I think authenticity for me is really not getting... The accuracy is, getting the clothes and the food and stuff right. But the authenticity comes from getting the mindset right. And I couldn't agree more with what the previous two speakers said. That, this sort of just taking modern people and sticking them in fancy dress, and they go in with all the attitudes and values of us. And the sort of novels I write, they tend to be, you take a contemporary British squaddy and you dress him up as a Roman, and it's just really, really depressing that they don't make, there's not the effort to realize these people did inhabit a different thought world. I mean, they had a slave-owning society. They had different attitudes to almost everything that we hold dear. They didn't have a commandment, thou shalt not kill. All the things that we regard as crucial, utterly different. I would like to also just quickly say that everyone sort of assumes before the novel we can't do that, because everyone forgets that the ancient world actually had a flourishing genre of novel writing, both in Latin and in Greek, and we can go to that. It's all these English literature departments who go, the novel was invented whenever. Well, no, actually the Greeks invented it a hell of a long time before that. So it's classicist, Donish sort of. So you're all wrong.
But a novel as representing conversational speech.
Oh yeah, they have loads of dialogue,
In Greek.
I would say more than the authenticity or accuracy, it is historical integrity, and that is based on mindset, very much so, but it's doing the research that may not necessarily show in the novel as info dump, but enables you to go with your characters, see everything as if you're there inside them. So you have to absolutely immerse yourself in that world. I have several strands to my research. Primary source, where you're looking at not just one person's opinion, but several people's opinions to get the different viewpoints of the time. The archaeological reports, which are also in their way primary source, all the material objects that people were using, handling, because this also had an effect on their behaviour. Academic secondary sources, again, across the board, because different academics will have different ideas. Then to go to places, and walk the walk, feel the atmospheres, look at what was there by the guidebooks, and reenactment, because that brings the whole lot of research into 3D living history. I've got a medieval cooking pot, and having experimented with that, it's an absolute replica of a late Anglo-Saxon, early Norman cooking pot. You put that on the fire with a beef and barley broth in, and you find that it doesn't burn on the bottom. If you put it on a simmer at the side of the hearth, you find it will plipple away for ages, quite happily on its own, which meant that, say, in the medieval period, you could go off and, get on with your spinning or something, go and do the garden and come back and find that dinner hadn't burnt. And you find that it condenses on the top and sort of runs down inside. That keeps it liquid. And that, providing you haven't put it in the hottest part of the fire, you can pick it up even without an oven glove type thing, which you can't get from seeing the object stuck together like a jigsaw puzzle in a museum glass or from a textbook. Living history enables you to find out how and why and what they did. To walk down a castle stairs in a pair of flat-soled shoes in a long dress, it just adds that dimension. And all these disciplines blended together really help you to understand the mindsets of the people, how they lived, and then to put it into a novel. And that's part of what I call having the integrity.
Well, I agree with everything everyone said, and just to add to that, what Daisy said and what Susan said in particular, that thing of not having the same feeling as those people. One of the advantages of being old and having to go writing and not acting is that I come from a different sensibility than now. I come from a 1950s sensibility, and it is different. That's all I can say. And so if it's different from 1950s, presumably, like religion, as you said, and everything, it's different particularly. So the true human heart is always probably the same, but the sensibility changes, and we have to make allowances for that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, one of the most sort of things that rejigged my brain about all this was reading a very well-known book by Lawrence Stone called The Family, Sex and Marriage, 1500 to 1800, which I imagine quite a lot of us know. And it is startling how clear he makes it, how differently, it's not only different from us, but across that period it changes enormously, very much with the coming of Protestantism. And it makes you realise how contingent it is, and as you say, how the research can draw out stuff that you wouldn't have known.
Mm. I think we haven't got much more time, have we? We do. Oh, great. We can go on to the next question. Or should we throw it to the floor, do you think, for questions from the floor? Is there a burning question from the floor? There is. It's over here. We perhaps offer a microphone. If you say it very loud, I'll repeat the question so everybody can hear it.
Would you say it's all right to have small eyes but not whoppers?
Right. In a nutshell, it's all right to have small eyes but not whoppers.
That's a big lie. That's a very big lie.
I can chime in on this because there's a book just come out by Stephen Alford, The Watchers, about espionage in Elizabethan times. And he starts off in the introduction by saying Elizabeth had been assassinated. This is a serious history book. So, who wants to take this one?
What if history is, Neil Ferguson, lots of people have written what if history books, and I think why not? I mean, and also you're making the premise totally clear because everybody knows that Elizabeth I, that the Armada was not successful. The reason I quoted Anonymous is that you could build up this terrific conspiracy theory that she did have all these secret illegitimate children. So I think there's a difference, isn't there? Because we know the Armada was defeated, but we don't necessarily, you could just about try and persuade people that Elizabeth I went off, had a few babies incognito, and then came back, but with Shakespeare,
So, and I do.
What about? Oh, sorry.
I do see why that gets the historian. We had someone in our session earlier that does get the historians worried because there is a worry that somebody is going to believe that story about Elizabeth's illegitimate children
also,
is true. Whereas, as you say, we know the Armada lost Full
exactly.
stop.
I mean, and you might think, I mean, I'm not sure I even dare say this, that a whole generation will grow up thinking that Thomas Cromwell was this kind of pussycat who was really nice to his family instead of the brutal psychopath he actually was.
Well, I was only going to say, sometimes people do take things as truth, like that film about Pearl Harbor that the Americans made, which was untrue, but it was taken as truth. And, of course, in 500 years' time, there may be a different truth that people take, just because we're all writing away.
I think this is a good moment, actually, to put in a question that we were circulating before, which I was going to ask, and I think it's this. Do you think people read historical novels to find out about the past? And if so, is there a certain danger in stressing the historical nature of your books? And I wondered, in light of that question, whether we all answer that, with a view to, do you feel that sense of responsibility that people are going to believe the past was like it was in your books? Elizabeth, do you want to... You said some very interesting things when you came back to me on that.
Yes, I can't remember what I said now because I haven't got my notes.
You said it was changing.
I think it has changed. When I was a teenager, and that was the time I got hooked on historical fiction. Anything went. You know, truth was a lot more fluid. And these days, you find you perhaps go if you go onto forums. On the internet, you find that readers are a lot keener on what is historically right. There's a group on Facebook called the History Police who say we're coming after you if you get stuff wrong. And they cite some very well-known authors who are their particular bugbears. I don't feel that there was this 20 or 30 years ago. I wonder if the internet has made a difference. People are able to study more because of information has opened up more widely. But I feel myself that expectations within historical fiction from the side of the readers has changed.
Barbara, do you feel the same?
Well, I think I answered, really.
Yeah.
Give someone else a...
Yeah. I wonder if it's also changed because it does seem necessary more and more to sell historical fiction by its non-fiction appeal, as it were. I mean, witness the fact that such a lot of it now is based on real historical characters, which has always been there within historical fiction, absolutely. But it's easy to sell a book. One of the ways you can say that why you should buy this book is because it's about someone you've heard of. And I do wonder whether a reader who bought a novel wanting to find out about a historical character they're aware of but don't know a lot about is going to be crosser if they come across something which they think, they may be wrong, is incorrect, than if it's quite... I mean, I've of my two novels, one is entirely fictional and one is about Elizabeth and Anthony Woodville and is quite closely rooted in what, relatively speaking, is quite well-documented lives. And I was very nervous going to the Richard III Society, partly because I think they might disagree with some of the novel, and partly because they know about it as much as more about it than I do. And I think some of the rage is also... I find it odd, but I think there's an anger about having been made to believe something by the evil novelist's arts. It's not a historical novel, but when Graham Swift wrote Waterland, and it's all set in the Fens, and it's the fenniest, squashiest, most web-footed novel you could possibly read. It's a wonderful novel. And 3 or 4 years later, he revealed the fact that he hadn't actually been to the Fens till after he'd written the novel. And he spent a couple of weeks there, presumably just checking out that, roughly. He got hate mail. And I think it must be from people who felt conned. This our dark arts of making these, we write these things within themselves as if they are true, unless it's a sort of explicit John Fowles or counterfactual thing. And people believe us, and then they discover it was lies, and they're furious. Well, get over it.
I find the thing that always gets me is that people have this sort of set checklist of ideas of what they believe to be historically true, which are actually usually not completely wrong, absolute nonsense. And occasionally you get the sort of weird stuff on the internet going, well, as one of my characters is thinking about some poetry as he's being beaten up. Well, I don't think about poetry when I'm getting a kicking. Yeah, but equally, you're not a Greek aristocrat from the 3rd century AD who's brought up, learning Homer by heart, are you? You're obviously a very ignorant, aggressive human being. But
Well, I'm very grateful to the novels of Jean Plaidy, which got me through my history O-level, basically. And because of them, there is nothing I don't know about Tudor and Stuart genealogy, which has stood me in very good stead now making historical TV programmes, because I'm the only person who knows what the younger sister of Charles II is called, which is surprisingly useful. So I think you've got to get some of those facts right, because otherwise, you betray your children at your peril. Yeah.
But you only, as long as you don't get caught.
As long as you don't, yeah.
Yes. And there's a mention of the internet there. I think also that they have the slight problem that the internet really does fudge where you're getting your facts from. And the frustration for me, with a historical hat on, is that the rubbish never goes away. It gets constantly recirculated. And Wikipedia, of all things, it's not about the most accurate information. It's got who's got the most tenacity to carry on changing it back to the rubbish they thought it was first time round. Drives me nuts.
I even find that in essays I'm marking at Oxford, obviously for the less diligent students. And you can instantly tell the bit from Wikipedia because it's just so badly written. And it's wrong.
Should we look for another question from the floor? There's a lady halfway back on the left here.
The word lying is a negative word. Just really that you're hoodwinking someone. In this case, that the author is trying to hoodwink the reader. And I'm sure no one would want to do it in a really unpleasant sense like that. Obviously, for the purposes of the plot, there are times when you have to play around with fact.
No, I don't agree with that.
Did everybody hear the question? Or
I'm sorry.
All right.
I was trying to qualify the difference between maybe a small thing and a larger thing, and to say that I wondered if you thought it was incumbent on the author perhaps to use the acknowledgements at the beginning of the novel to tell the reader what they have done, so that at least there is an openness up front. You wouldn't accept even a teeny...
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I beg your pardon. But I feel strongly. You're talking about fibs and lies, and I said earlier that I think a lie with a fact because it suits your plot is wrong. That's just what I think. That's all.
Yes, I agree.
Oh, I do lie. I lie outrageously. I lie about...
Do you change facts?
Well, I changed the
What
name
do you
of
mean
the
by
individual.
fact, though? I think that's something we don't examine enough.
I'll qualify what I said because I needed to find a person who was a herald. Well, we know who all the heralds were in the 16th century, but if I started writing about one of those heralds and what they actually did, the story would be very tedious because I wouldn't be able to do what I want to do in the story. I'm looking at the 1560s as being a really interesting place to set novels which inquire into the importance of loyalty and betrayal. Importance of loyalty to your wife, sexual loyalty, loyalty to your religion, loyalty to your state, loyalty to yourself. And if you do all that in a modern world, no one's really going to take much interest. If you put it in a novel in the 1560s, where you're going to get your head lopped off with disloyalty to the state, you're burnt at the stake for heresy if you're very unlucky. If you happen to be an Anabaptist, you can get burnt at the stake, or a woman, of course, for treason. And disloyalty to your wife, well, adulterers can get flogged publicly, and a little afterwards they could actually get hanged. So it is a big business then. Your things become so much more important. So I can't really change the life stories of any of the heralds, so I made one up. I gave him a very similar name, but I lie outrageously about what happened to him because it actually happened to me. So the questions...
But that's different, isn't it?
But it's lying.
But it's different than
it's
saying...
conscious and it's deceitful.
It's different than saying America was responsible for solving World War II.
That's what I mean by what do you mean by fact? You know, I mean, the heralds that were there and weren't there are facts. America, who won World War II, is a fact. So is the shape of a cooking pot. It's actually, I think it just... It's kind of not a very helpful thing to talk about in a way because
that's what it is.
I know what I'm trying to do is say that it's only an interesting or useful conversation to have if you complicate the idea of what's a fact and what isn't, to the point where you can start making distinctions because we're all... And the minute you write anything as if it were true, which we're all doing in the novel, that's what the novel is, you're lying. Yeah. And what's going on here, it seems to me, is there's a completely tacit system in all our heads about what we accept as an invention and what we object to or get tripped up by. And as a writer, what you spend a lot of, actually the duller bits of my writing life are about, have I got to stick to this, or can I invent it, or do I have to go and find out about it, or can I just do what I need? And you spend a lot of that time having those conversations with yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the question of what is a fact is a fascinating thing. And every time people say there are facts waiting to be discovered in the archives, you point out, well, okay, let's imagine there's a fact in the National Archives somewhere which no one knows yet. Is it a fact yet? What if the contrary thing is in the Archives Nationales in France, waiting to be discovered? So you've got two opposite things. Which is factual? It's very difficult to work with.
They're not facts. I mean, that's what I mean when I say they're not facts, they're the record.
People think there are facts.
Yes, and they're
waiting to
not.
be discovered.
It's the version of the actual reality that somebody chose to write down.
But if we get things wrong, then that's great, because that means that the train spotter reader has something to do. And I think that's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, there are lots of readers out there who really like it when you get something wrong, because then they can write and tell you in great detail how wrong you've got it. And that's fantastic. That means they're really engaging with the text. And I think in fact, I'm always going to put mistakes in my novels just to check that people are paying attention.
Maybe on the end of the acknowledgements, free copy, signed copy of my next novel, if you can write to me with the lie I know I put in there.
Yes.
Listen, when I was a little girl, King George VI died, and I remember. Now, if I read a book which said, well, actually, he didn't die, but he was whisked away and all sorts of things done, I can't bear it.
All right. When you have a medieval king who didn't die... Harry, you're being very quiet here.
No, I'm terribly sorry. Well, for a practicing historian with a historian hat on, I'm actually not very interested in facts at all. So there's this fundamental sort of thing that people who don't do history assume history is all about digging up facts, and of course it's not. The period I work in, most of the facts are known, and it's all about interpretation. And you construct arguments. You set up a hypothesis, and then you test it against what data we have.
But that's what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a huge difference between working as a historian and, I know Ian doesn't agree with me here, working as a historian and working as a historical novelist. I mean, I invent things as a historian. I imagine the bits in between the evidence, I'm talking about mentalities and imagining how groups or individuals felt about stuff. I don't invent dialogue for them in the history things.
But you have a certain building block, don't you, which is the facts. That's all I'm saying, really.
Yeah, you have the data. I mean, I don't
But I know there are some undergraduate history courses who put Wolf Hall on their reading lists, not because it's true, but saying this is the quality of imagination that as historians we should be bringing to our study of the record and the facts, and this is the quality of narrative. This is a causally related chain of events is the most fundamental definition of narrative I've come across, and they're basically the same. The truth claims of history and historical fiction are different, and what we as fiction writers mean when we say truth is different, because we're often talking about an emotional and a human truth. But basically it is the same game with different boundaries, it seems to me, and a slightly different ethical system underlying it. But it interests me that people writing historical fiction writing and reading it, so rarely question what it is which things they feel have got to be right and which things they feel, of course there could be this village called whatever that's a bit like this village and a bit like that village.
But by that token, you could write a lovely novel about Hitler, about how nice he was to animals, and he banned hunting and vivisection, and, he was a vegetarian, and just leave out all the other stuff, couldn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, and that's slightly what...
You might have trouble getting a publisher, but...
Well, I know, but you might not in 500 years' time, as HarperCollins have found with Wolf Hall. I mean, Hilary Mantel's depiction of Cromwell is not one that... the sources, you have to take a big imaginative leap to go that far, wouldn't you?
I'm not familiar enough with the sources to take a position on that, but I can well imagine that's true. But I think you could still say this is the kind of there is an imaginative space here that historians ought to engage with as well. Yeah. Engage with beastly word. Sorry.
But aren't we all agreeing with that? Except what Harry says, we have building blocks. And then we can go almost where we want to. But it's the building blocks that shouldn't perhaps be changed. That's...
Yes, but I think it's interesting. I think we probably all have slightly different sense of what those unchangeable building blocks are.
Yeah, I think that's true. Are there any more? There's a question Towards the back of the room there. Not to jar the reader out of the story, absolutely. I personally think that authenticity can go too far, and if we actually reflected what 15th century was really like and the 16th century was really like, we would appall our readers. They would send us hate mail because we'd be talking, our heroes would think that supporting social hierarchy and class differences would be virtuous, a divine thing to do. I think you could,
Sexist, racist,
anti-Semitic,
that's sensibility, all the rest of it. Yes.
That's the sensibility of the times.
Yes.
That's the author's job then, to show that, but in such a way that a modern audience can understand it. You are, as a novelist, you are building a bridge between the past, if you like, and the present for readers to walk over. And if you can show that and still and get away with it and not have readers run off screaming, then you're a bloody good novelist.
Yeah, I particularly like the point about Wolf Hall being handed out, because I'm conscious of the fact we have 3,500 academic historians in this country, and very few of them actually write. They're all paid at taxpayers' expense. Very few of them write for the public, or can write for the public. And if we could get across to more of our academic historians that not only have they got a good tale to tell, but there are ways of telling it and actually communicating with the people who pay their bills, that'd be a good thing. Yes. Do we have another question from
we have,
down here at the front, please? Harry, it's for you.
I'm thinking that one of the people who's missing from this panel would be somebody like Suetonius, the Roman author, who
he was unavailable today.
He knows how to spin a story. And I just can, in my mind's eye, see him fitting into this panel so well about the lying art. I mean, it seems like his, to us when we read him now, even though he was in Roman times, he's so entertaining and he's so easy to read. And I just have one other comment, is that I teach at university in the States, and I cannot tell you after how many students come up to me really excited about a work of a historical novel that they've read that gets them right into the period, and it makes my job so much easier. So I can see assigning Wolf Hall, accuracy or not, they'll figure it out. And how many printed books are out there that are not accurate? I mean, these books, tons of books. So it seems to me that that's everybody's job, is to weed out what is really sort of authentic. So, and anyway, I just wanted your comment about what you think Suetonius would think if he were up in this panel.
He's doing a book signing.
Well, he would have been, but he's just been sacked by the Emperor Hadrian, and he's keeping his head down. No, I think you're entirely right, and sort of referring back to what I said right at the start. I mean, all the ancient historians, Herodotus, Thucydides, Tacitus, and biographers like Suetonius, are much closer to modern historical novelists than they are to modern historians. They all invent dialogue. The speech is a set piece. And everyone knows the speeches are made up. I mean, okay, Thucydides has a famous quote about, when it comes to speeches, I'll either give the exact words, or, if I can't, I'll make up suitable ones. So that's, I think, why I don't have any sort of great conceptual problems shifting between the two, because they made stuff up all the time, and their readers expected them to. And it's rather the point you made, that it's what the readership will allow you, what the desires they bring to the text. You know, how much can you play with history? I mean, I think I said this morning in a different panel, I'm perfectly happy with Patrick O'Brien that Jack Aubrey and Stephen Turin didn't exist, but I want him to get it right when he sails a ship and fights a battle. Well, apparently, according to a naval historian called Roger, Patrick O'Brien got almost every land-based aspect of the Navy completely and utterly wrong, which I, of course, don't believe, because I'm a huge fan of O'Brien, so obviously the story is wrong and O'Brien was right.
Any more questions?
But I think that, well, I was just going to say that, there are a lot of contemporary, journalistic histories, say, of the financial crisis. I mean, I don't want to name them, but that are written sort of in real time, where they say, and then Jack Reacher said this to him, and they quote dialogue, which obviously they've made up, but that will go into the future. People will be reading that as if it's fact, and it's one of those, it's an interesting thing that a lot of the most fictional historical novels are written as almost as contemporary journalism, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. In the front here.
Just a quickie, really. when I'm reading something historical, I often think, right, how much of this actually happened? And then I go back and look and find out how much of it did actually happen. And actually, it's not that I care particularly if I've enjoyed the story, I just would like to know. So if you know that you've written something that isn't actually fact, and I'm not talking about something major like Elizabeth having 6 other kids or something, but if you know you've done something, should you kind of point that out in your author's notes that you've taken liberties with something?
Of the author's notes. This
Absolutely.
We've discussed this before, haven't we? I mean, there are 2 opinions. One that they're a good thing and they enhance the book, and the other is that they're a bad thing and they just puncture that bubble. I mean, we've discussed this before. Do you want to have a go at answering this?
Well, I mean, having said that, I can't really put my money where my mouth is, because there's a historical note at the back of Secret Alchemy, because I was aware that I told the story deliberately in a very episodic way, and I did want to provide a brief overview of the arc of Elizabeth and Anthony's lives. But my idea was formed when I failed to get anywhere with reading Oscar and Lucinda, because the acknowledgements at the beginning gave away the fact that Oscar's father was based on Philip Goss, who I knew a certain amount about. And it's fabulous writing and a fascinating book, and I was really looking forward to it. But because I spent the first 100 pages thinking, now is this like Philip Goss, or was it actually a bit different? What's Carey changed and so on? It meant the bubble never got established in the first place, frankly. And so I ended up finding myself very cross. And I think I fundamentally feel that I'm not in the business. I'm trying to weave a single rope of this story for you to follow. It has many strands. Some are complete invention. A lot of them are invention within the boundaries of what I know about the period. Some of them are report, and some are record, and some are actual, unarguable, physical fact. And my job as a writer is to twist that together till you read it as one rope. And I'm not about to unpick it for you. That's not what I'm trying to do. And I'm not sure that I'm even willing to do that at the end of the novel. You go on my website, you'll find the books. But my job is to make the rope, not pull it apart.
That's a great analogy. Can I nick it, please?
Feel free. Especially if I've changed your mind.
I'm the exact opposite. I'd never put it at the start of the novel because it would ruin it. I mean, But when I published my first novel, I, weird enough, had quite a struggle with my publisher to put in a lengthy historical afterward, because I grew up reading George MacDonald Fraser, and I loved the historical endnotes of him. I just like the pedant in me, endnotes appeal. And I think a lot of people who read historical fiction will then want to find out more about the period, the place, the people, and it's only fair that I give them that chance. But equally, as a historian, I do feel the need to say, by the way, these are the bits I played with history. Because I don't want people reading my novels and actually believing there was a Roman general who happened to be an Anglo-Saxon nobleman, because he wasn't. I mean, there was a real man, but I like to own up at the end. I see them like the add-on bonus features on DVDs. I mean, you don't have to look at them.
Exactly.
Some people will, some won't. I mean, I've had one wonderful one-star review who mainly complained about the historical afterward. Didn't actually mention the novel. And he just went, well, it bored the crap out of me. It was just full of history.
Yes.
What exactly were you expecting?
I put it afterward to my book, which is set in the 1890s, because a lot of it's about the excesses of the American Gilded Age. And I just want to point out that all the stuff that I'd talked about, these extraordinary parties and whatever, was based on fact, because I knew that people would just think I'd made it up because it was so excessive and so bonkers that I just wanted to point out that this really did go on, because I wanted people to realise that, conspicuous consumption is not something, that belongs to Russian oligarchs today. It was just as bad, in the 1890s in Newport, Rhode Island.
Yeah. We've got 2 minutes left, and there was a hand up on the balcony, and I'm conscious we didn't got balconies.
So you don't have to forget us in the 2 and 6-pennies. In terms of the character arc, how much do you feel that for the sake of telling a good story, you still have to tell it through modern eyes? If I take the example of the SOE agents in the Second World War, these days the books you read all start off with these women in cotton shifts, rather mousy, but by the end of 1945 they're all wearing lipstick, broad-brimmed hats and tossing grenades left, right and centre. when in fact, when you read about the SOE agents, they were sharp and bloodthirsty from day one. There was no development when you read their biographies. Now I sound like a train spotter. But I just wonder if for the sake of the character arc and for the sake of a good story, we just have to accept that kind of development.
Who'd like to respond to that one?
I think, I mean, in a sense, if you pick a real, assuming we're working with real real historical characters, if you can't convincingly, within the boundaries of the facts you feel you have to stick to, see the previous half hour, then pick another character. I think you do need a character arc. I don't think you can write a novel with unchanging characters. But you have to work within the rules, the sort of ethical system that you set. You know, choose another character. And I agree, it's the sort of thing that annoys one about careless cheap historical fiction is that they don't work within the boundaries. They simply impose our modern sense on material that won't take it, as it were.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of our allotted time now. Can I just finish by suggesting one thing? It came out of writing a biography of Henry IV, which starts with the line, Shakespeare has got a lot to answer for. And bearing in mind what we heard about Richard III earlier, I thought, I designed a talk all about Henry IV and telling people about how our view of the man is distorted by Shakespeare, etc. And people don't go there because Queen Elizabeth used to lock people up for writing about Henry IV. And I went through this thing, and by the end of it, you think that Shakespeare was an appalling historian. And yeah, rightly so, you should think that by the end of the talk. But then I put the question, if someone's going to write the story of your life in 400 years' time, would you rather it was a professor at university or Shakespeare?
Yes.
So with that, I think, thank all the panellists. Thank you very much.
Could I just ask the panel if who would be pro the man in the iron mask and who would be against the man in the iron mask? This concept of if you start with a lie that's big enough, does that work?
A lie that's big enough.
I think there's something to be said for it because it sets up the reader proper. I mean, they know where they are if it's a thumping great lie at the beginning. Yeah. We all know that all bets are off in a way.
Yeah,
as long as you see it through.
Fatherland works.
Fatherland works, yes.
I think that, I mean, for me, that I always think, you know, you've got to accept a few lies. Anyway.